All right, good morning, everybody. We are looking at a larger section of Revelation than we have in the more recent classes. And so we have a lot to cover this morning. But really, a lot of the main message of this section here is a declaration that Babylon is going to be judged, which I think is representing the Roman Empire of this time period. And so, but this section also previews what the rest of the book of Revelation is about. So this is one of those sections we can do a little bit quicker than other sections in the book. And I'll just remind you, here's kind of what the plan is for now. But today, lesson 9, chapters 14, 15, 16. Next week, 17 and 18, which is about the fall of Babylon in more detail. We're going to have to do 19 and 20, I think, separately, and then finish with 21 and 22. About the new heavens and the new earth. And so that's the plan moving forward as we look forward to completing this book. As we get into this morning, though, let's go ahead and open up with a word of prayer. Gracious Father, thank you for bringing us here this morning. Thank you for the opportunity to study your word. Help it to penetrate deeply into our hearts. Help us to understand the message that you want us to understand from it. Thank you for this time together. Thank you for Jesus, who has created the local churches where we can be bound together by your blood, working together for the same purposes. And it's in his name we pray. Amen. Okay, chapters 12 through 16, if we kind of stretch over that whole section, in some ways is asking the question, what are you going to worship? You're going to either be a worshiper of the dragon and its allies with the two beasts, or you're going to be a worshiper of the Lamb. And something that we're going to see a couple times in this section is that the worshipers of God will sing songs of joy and victory. We're the ones who get to sing. But the worshipers of the beast are the ones that are going to be judged. And the judgment, like I said earlier, is specifically against Babylon. Now, we don't read that until chapter 16. Look at 16:19. The great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And God remembered Babylon the Great to make her drain the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath. So specifically brings up Babylon here. Is Babylon a nation at this time in history? Is this like a prominent nation? No. And so this is referring, I think, to Rome. But why say it by referring to Babylon? Why not just say Rome? Yeah, there's a couple ways people historically have looked at this. Let me just preface this question with that, but yeah.
Well, one reason the Jews would have understood Babylon because Babylon in captivity.
Yes.
And they would have understood that because Babylon's still kind of an enemy of the past. And then, so they would have seen Rome as that since Rome occupies Judea. So they would have kind of understood
Yes.
well. And the fact that, the Jews, I think, and I think we should too today, when you see a formula of sin permeate a nation or a group, that's a formula that's destructive.
And it's another Babylon. Yes. So some people have used to say about the book of Revelation, there's some commentaries amongst brethren that are pretty popular that have argued that Revelation is saying this stuff in coded, encrypted language so that the Jews would understand the meaning of it, but the Romans wouldn't. I don't think that's the reason. I think anybody that would read this back then would have gone, okay, well, what is the big superpower that's going to be destroyed? And chapter 17 is going to make it very clear that it's Rome. But it's using the term of Babylon to make parallels to the Old Testament, that there was this oppressor and that God eventually had victory over those people and all of that. And so I think it's intended to just draw parallels between the two. But what we're looking at today is chapter 14 is going to have 3 quick succession visions that are going to preview, tie some loose ends from the previous chapter or sew together what we saw before, and then give a preview of the rest of the book. And then chapter 15:1 through 16:1 is preparing these bowls of wrath. And then 16 are the 7 bowls of wrath that are going to be poured out on Babylon or on Rome. And so that's what we're looking at this morning. Comments or questions before we get started into the text? Okay, let's read chapter 14 and look at the 144,000. Before I read this, do you guys remember where else we read about the 144K? Chapter 7. What happened to them in chapter 7? They're sealed before these four winds of judgment are opened up on people. And so they're going to maybe physically die, which is, I think, what we're going to see it happen to them here. They're going to physically die, but spiritually they're going to be protected. And so look at what happens with these people. And this goes from chapters 12 and 13. What is the beast doing to Christians? Or the dragon doing to Christians? Persecuting and waging war against them and killing them. So look what happens to them in 14, 1 through 5. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and the Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of a loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of a harpist playing on their harps, and they were singing a new song before the throne, and before the four living creatures, and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. That's an important thing there. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as firstfruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. All right. So this 144,000, where is it that they're located in this passage? Mount Zion. Now that contrasts to the dragon and the beasts that are by the seaside and they're on the earth. But these 144,000, Mount Zion, God's presence is the idea. And they're before his throne in verse 3. Previously, these 144,000 were Christians on earth before judgment was going to start happening, I think, against Rome. Like before the bowls of wrath are finally poured out. And so I take it that in chapter 7, the 144,000, we compared that to the book of Numbers, where there's the numbering of the soldiers, and they're going to go fight in the book of Joshua. Here, the 144,000 are killed, and where do they end up after they're killed? In God's presence. So I think it's showing that they were martyred. And the characteristics of these people, basically, is that they stood firm against the persecution. If they had to give up their life for the Lord, they were going to do it. And so I'll just rattle through these things. The Father's name is on their foreheads. They don't have the mark of the beast. They have the mark of the Father. They're virgins, and I don't think that means like some kind of literal thing. I think it's saying that they didn't defile themselves with the harlot that we're going to read about in chapters 17 and 18 that represents the Roman Empire. So they didn't indulge in worldliness, is the idea. They're redeemed from the earth, which means that they've been killed and martyred. They've been taken from the earth, is the idea, at the end of verse 3. They're the first fruits, some of the first early Christians to be persecuted, I think, is part of the idea there. They followed the Lamb wherever he went, even if it meant death, and they are blameless. There's no lie found in their mouth. They were faithful to the message of Jesus. They spoke about it even until death. Anything you guys want to say just about the characteristics of these people? Notice that in verses 2 and 3, they're singing a new song very loudly, very happily, I'm sure. No one else could learn this new song, only those who are redeemed. Imagine that you had a favorite band that was coming out with a new album, and you found out that some other fans had already heard some of the new songs, and you were really frustrated because you wanted to hear them. Like here, there's people that are going to learn a song that a lot of people will never, ever learn. And the only people that are going to learn this song are the ones that are willing to give up their life for the Lord and remain spiritual virgins and not play with the world. Thoughts or comments about the 144,000? So these are the people being persecuted in chapters 12 and 13, and they're killed. The world thinks that they were victorious over these annoying Christians, and then this is where they end up. Thoughts or comments on that? Okay, so chapter 14, verses 6 through 13, you're now going to have this vision of these four angels. We're not going to read all of this because we have a lot of text to cover today. But there's four angels that come with different, like, quick messages. And the first one in verses 6 and 7 has this headline that the hour of judgment has come and everybody's urged to fear God and worship the Creator. That summarizes chapters 15 and 16, where we're going to have the 7 bowls of wrath. So we're about to look at that in more detail. The second headline, or the second angel, in verse 8, summarizes Revelation 17 and 18, where he declares that Babylon has fallen. We're already told the outcome before it ever even happens. And the reason why Babylon is going to be judged is because it was seducing the nations to sexual immorality. Do you see how in the context, the 144,000 that are virgins have not indulged in the things of the world in order to have the riches of Babylon or Rome by compromising their views so they can buy, sell, and trade, like we looked at in chapter 13. Okay, I want to read the rest of these, though. Look at, starting in verse 9, and we'll read 9 to 13. And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he will also drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger. And he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, these worshipers of the beast and its image, who worship whoever receives the mark of its name." Verse 12, "Here's a call for endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, 'Write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them.'" All right. So in this third headline, what's the basic message of this third headline here? The judgment on the beast worshipers. It's like if they got the mark of the beast on their head or their hand, God uses that like a homing beacon to judge those people that have aligned with the beast. And what, again, from last week and the week before, what would it mean to align with the beast? Yes. Yeah, if Rome says that I have to bow the knee to Caesar, and then I can put food on the table, and I can get that new donkey that has nos on it, because it's like a tricked out donkey, and I can get that new cool jacket, I'll go ahead and do that, because I really like these things. And so if you're worldly, and Rome offers all kinds of worldly goods, and all you have to do is just bow down and worship the emperor, but you know that you don't actually worship him. But if you just say those words, then you can get whatever you want. And that's a big deal in the book of Revelation. You're supposed to love not your life even until death. And so you're either going to be judging Christians with Babylon, or you're going to be judged with Babylon, if that makes sense. You guys see what I'm saying there? You're either going to align with Babylon and judge Christians, or you're going to be wait, am I saying the same thing twice? I don't know. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. You guys know you probably know what I mean. All right. So the smoke of the torment goes up forever and ever. We're going to see that in chapters really 17 through 20. We're going to see that in a couple different ways. And there's no rest day or night for those people. Thoughts or comments on that third headline? All right, the fourth one summarizes Revelation 21 and 22. The Christians who endure will eventually get rest, and the ones that die from now on are going to be blessed. And that was like what we just saw with the 144,000. They were redeemed from the earth, they died for the Lord's cause, and they're at Mount Zion in the presence of God singing songs that nobody else is going to learn. So this little section here, is this giving us a preview of everything else that we're about to see? Any comments or questions through verse 13? All right. Another part of this preview is this picture of two judgments. So if we just learned that there's going to be judgment against the beast worshipers, and then there's going to be blessing for the righteous, it's almost like this last section here in chapter 14 shows you two judgments or two outcomes. But this is a debated section. So what happens here with these two harvests is some people think that each harvest shows judgment and salvation, and some people think that the first harvest is salvation and the second harvest is judgment. And so I take the view that harvest number one is salvation of Christians, and you'll see this, I think, as we go through this. Look at verses 14 to 16. "Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud one like a son of man, with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, "Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is fully ripe." So he sat on the cloud, swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. All right. We'll see especially the contrast in just a second. This harvest does not sound nearly as ominous as the second one. Who is the one coming to do this reaping, though? Yeah, and he's described one like a son of man. Like that, it's also kind of like a description of Jesus. And he comes and the harvest is ripe, and I take it that that's what that's talking. In John chapter 4, harvesting is a way of talking about evangelism. And so I think that that's the harvest of Christians, that they're going to be the ones that are blessed when they die. But look at the other judgment in 17 through 20. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sickle, a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over the fire, and he who called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, "Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. Is it just me, or does that one sound a little bit more scary? I think that one's a little bit more scary. And so this angel comes from the temple. I think you get this imagery that sin is ripe for judgment, and there's this winepress slaughter that happens when he comes. The winepress is outside the city. It's like not with God. It's not in his presence. And there's blood for 1,600 stadia. That's a really long time, really long distance. Trampled for 42 months. Now they are being trampled over. And so the two choices you have here is, which judgment do you want to be part of? Do you want to be part of the people that learned the new song? You're the 144,000 that didn't compromise with the world? Or do you want to be judged with the beast with this really gruesome kind of picture? Thoughts or comments on that? I know we're covering a lot of stuff right now. Yeah. Yes. Yes, Isaiah 63 uses the same imagery, I think ultimately of Jesus coming to judge, and it uses the imagery of pressing out the grapes. And that's why I think the first harvest, that's the outcome for God's people, but we're not giving all the details of resting from your labors and all of that. And then 17 through 20 is, this is not what you want to have happen to you. 1,600 stadia, by the way, 40 times 40. 40 is a number of testing and trial in the Bible, and so it seems to fit that. Ryan? Okay. Yeah, that's good. Okay. One of the benefits of living in a farming community, that we got people that know this stuff. All right, anything else you want to say about that? Okay, so those are three visions that again, conclude some things from the previous chapters and then anticipate the things to come. So let's start seeing some of these things that are to come. You got these 7 bowls of wrath that are going to be poured out, and this is going to be like the severe judgment against Babylon. But before we get those judgments happening, we see this preparation for the bowls. Look at 15:1 through 16:1. Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and amazing, 7 angels with 7 plagues, which are the last, for with them the wrath of God is finished. And I saw what appeared to be a sea of glass mingled with fire, and also those who had conquered the beast and its image and the number of its name, standing beside the sea of glass with harps of God in their hands. Sounds kind of like the 144,000. Verse 3, and they sang the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, Great and amazing are your deeds, O Lord God the Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the nations. Who will not fear, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. After this I looked, and the sanctuary of the tent of witness in heaven was opened. And out of the sanctuary came the 7 angels with the 7 plagues, clothed in pure bright linen, with golden sashes around their chests. And one of the 4 living creatures gave to the 7 angels 7 golden bowls full of wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. And the sanctuary was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no one could enter the sanctuary until the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were finished. Look also at 16:1. Then I heard a loud voice from the temple telling the 7 angels, Go and pour out on the earth the 7 bowls of the wrath of God. All right, let's, so introducing the bowls here. It's considered to be this great and amazing sign. 7 angels with these 7 plagues. Now in verse 6, what do we notice about how the angels are dressed? Yeah, this is the attire of priests. And it's like they're doing God's heavenly priestly kind of work or something, like from his presence. They've got these golden bowls, and we've seen the connection to the bowls in the prayers of the saints before. The saints in chapter 6 were crying out for vengeance against their persecutors. And now we're going to see these bowls being poured out in full, like your prayers are finally going to be answered. And this text says that it's going to finish God's wrath. Now, do you remember in Revelation 6 through 11 when we had the 7 trumpets and the 7 seals? Do you remember what kind of numbering it was used to say that so much of the earth was destroyed or so many of the people was destroyed? Do you guys remember what the fractions were? It was like 1/3 or 1/4. It started out with 1/4 in chapters like 6 and 7, I think, and then it went up to 1/3. So like there's going to be some turmoil, in Rome, and it got a little bit worse across chapters 6 through 11. But now what's going to happen? They're going to be done, is the idea. Like they've been given all these warning shots, and they have not done what they needed to do. And so it's a contrast to the warning trumpets before. In verse 8, there's this smoke in the sanctuary, so nobody can enter. Nobody's going to interrupt these judgments of God. When God gets to a point where he has to pour out his wrath, nothing's going to stop him from doing it, is the idea. Okay, now, in this whole context, you've got these people that are singing the song of Moses. There's been this new deliverance, a new exodus by the blood of Jesus, and they're standing next to a sea of glass mingled with fire. Anybody have any idea why that's significant? Yes, in the Old Testament, what does the sea represent? Chaos, like chapter 7 of Daniel, there's all these beasts that come out of the sea. When Jesus calms the storm, people say, who is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? Because everybody knew that you can't control the waters, but why can Jesus do it? And so I think it shows that chaos is under control because it's a sea of glass. It's like calm now. And so, but maybe also God's people have crossed the Red Sea because it's mingled with fire. It would have like a red kind of appearance, maybe giving more echoes of the Exodus. So these people have been physically destroyed but have been spiritually protected. Again, it's a picture, I think, of the 144,000. If you're willing to serve the Lord even until death, you'll ultimately be okay. And they sing the song of Moses and the Lamb. They're praising God's deeds and his ways in verse 3. In verse 4, the nations should all ultimately acknowledge his greatness, and God's judgments are just. Everything that we're about to read about with these harsh judgments, a just God is doing all of this. Now, thoughts or comments about this? This is all the preamble to what we're about to see. Are we covering a lot of stuff, or are we good? If anybody needs me to slow down on something, I can do that. Does anybody need me to slow down and re-explain anything? to the best of my ability. All right. Here is a chart on the 7 bowls. You see in the middle, those are the 7 bowls that we're about to be reading about. On the left side, I contrast that with the 7 trumpets that were in Revelation 8. And then on the right side, I have a comparison to the plagues in Egypt when Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt. And so you can see lots of parallels between all of this. Let me just start out with this question. So the first of the 7 bowls is poured out on land. It gives sores to those who have the mark of the beast. Kind of like the 6th plague in Exodus when people are given the dust and the boils come upon people. The 2nd bowl is going to turn the sea into blood, and it's going to affect all the creatures. Kind of reminds you of the Nile turning to blood. And we could keep going down, and you see all these parallels. What was the message of the 10 plagues in Egypt? What was the point of all of that? God is the I am. God is the one that's above all the Egyptian gods. He's the one that you should worship. And so what would be the message if there's very strong parallels going on from the 10 plagues to what we're seeing here? What would the message be? Yeah. Yes. Yes. And that's why we just read about in Revelation 15, they sang the song of Moses. Well, and then the next chapter, you have a lot of things that sound like the 10 plagues of Egypt. And so the 10 plagues happened, and then they crossed the Red Sea, and then they sang the song of Moses. Do you see how all of this is showing a new Exodus? But in this case in Revelation, the Exodus comes about sometimes by you physically dying. And you're still gonna make it to the other side, and you're gonna be okay ultimately. Comments or questions just on those parallels? You see on the left side the 7 trumpets. The 7 trumpets affected the same areas as the 7 bowls, but now it's just getting amped up. It's like the plagues light version was in chapter 8, and now it's the plagues like the heavy version. And all of this is bringing about a greater exodus. But at the same time, when the 10 plagues were given in Egypt, was God also trying to teach something to the Egyptians? He was trying to teach, well, that's what Patty said, that God is the I am. Were there any of the Egyptians who became worshipers of God? Yes, in chapter 9 of Exodus, some of the Egyptians became worshipers of God. So there's multiple reasons for this. Did the Roman Empire or Babylon, did they understand that Jesus was Lord? Some did, but the Roman Empire, by and large, didn't recognize Jesus as Lord. They thought Caesar was Lord. And so what if God sends these plague-like things to help them know that their gods are all false and fake? Could that bring some of them to their knees to start worshiping the Lord, while the Lord at the same time is delivering his people from this persecution? Do you guys see the parallels? The more you know these stories from the Old Testament, the more it informs what we're looking at. All right, so does that sketch of the book of Exodus kind of help inform what we're looking at here? Comments or questions on that?
Well, the people were always warned, now listen, you better stick with this, stick with my ordinances, don't fall for them. So we always have that choice to choose God or the beast. There's no in between.
Yes. And here's one application, I think, from this then. You remember when 9/11 happened? Some of you don't remember 9/11. But when 9/11 happened, do you remember there was some like televangelists or people saying like, oh, God did this to us because of all of the abortions or something? Maybe, but how can we speak with confidence about things like that? We don't know if God did this for this or that reason, but here's what we can know. Whenever there's some kind of national calamity or some kind of frightening thing that's happened, it should still remind us that we don't have as much power and control as we thought we did. So like if you lived in LA right now with all the fires that just happened, I don't think that we need to answer the question, well, did God do this because they're all sinners in LA? No, if you live there, you should go, well, you know what? I thought I had built my little life the way I wanted it with my nice little house in the Palisades, and it all crumbled, and maybe I should realize that there's something bigger than the life I thought I was constructing. So if something were to happen in the United States, I don't know that we need to be definitively understanding, did God do this or did not? Or if he did do this, what are all the reasons? No, just react with, are there idols and false gods in my life that are being crushed right now, and I need to learn from that? That's, I think, why one of the reasons God is sending this upon Rome is because of all of their idolatry, which we'll read more about in chapters 17 and 18. Now, we don't need to read all of these bowls, but if you look at like the fourth one, the sun scorches the people, kind of like the inverse of the darkness of the plagues in Exodus. The fifth one, the throne of the beast is plunged into darkness and agony. The Euphrates is dried up, which means that no more kings can come through and start destroying them. Kind of sounds like frogs from the Nile. But there's this interlude that happens before the seventh bowl. I want to read the seventh bowl in just a second, but before the seventh bowl, there is like this little pause in the pouring out of the bowls that I want to read this. Look at verses 13 to 16, and this, especially at first, may not seem easy at all to understand. Look at verse 13. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. I hate it when that happens. For they are demonic spirits performing signs who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake, keeping his garments on, that they may not go about naked and be seen exposed. And they assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. If you've listened to people on the radio, you'll hear about the Battle of Armageddon. And people have that in books, like Armageddon with fire all over it. And like, it's happening because of Trump or because of Obama or something. All right, what's actually going on here? First of all, who is supplying these 3 frogs? The beast, and what else? The false prophet, the dragon. So do you remember back in chapters 12 and 13 where you had the sea beast, the earth beast that were being used by the dragon? And so it's this unholy trinity, and it's like each one of them is like, here's a frog for all of you. What's the point of having a frog being supplied by these wicked things? Yeah, and by the way, one of them is called the false prophet. That was the earth beast. It wasn't called a false prophet in chapter 13, but we saw that it was involved with false religion in chapter 13. But frogs are unclean animals in the Old Testament. Have you ever had frog legs before? When I was trying out at the church in California, one of the elders wanted me to go to his house, and he had a way of cooking frog legs, and I had never tried them before. And I just remember like this, it was like an interesting encounter because I was going to go ahead and eat frog legs with a potential would-be elder, and they were actually really good. And he was a good elder. It was fun to be around him. But that was in the Old Testament. You couldn't have frog legs. I don't know if this is part of what's going on here, if it's communicating that sort of idea, or do you remember when the frogs in the 10 plagues, they were coming out of the Nile, and then the magicians, Janus and Jambres, they added more frogs. Like, you're not really helping it. Like, you can duplicate the plague, but it's a plague. It'd be really cool if you could remove the plague, and they didn't do that. All right, so what do you think this would be representing? False, unclean ideas coming from their mouths that are going to deceive the world. And in verse 16, assemble the world at Harmageddon, or Armageddon. Now, let me just ask this question. What have you heard people say about the Battle of Armageddon? Just maybe radio things you've heard, friends that you've heard talk about this. What is the Battle of Armageddon?
It's a one-time fight.
Yeah, it's this one-time final battle where everything's gonna, come down to the wire and we're gonna win. What else? Have you guys heard anybody else say anything else about this? All right, well, let me just ask this then. What is this talking about? Yes. Yes, this is a place. This is actually a place that in the Old Testament, they're going to use false signs to gather the people. I think the frogs or the propaganda that they're spreading, the false unclean ideas that they're spreading. Megiddo is a place of major battles in the Old Testament. You can read about it in Judges 4 and 5. You can read about it with Jehu in 2 Kings 9 and 10. You can read about it when Josiah was killed. I think that's 2 Kings 23. And so there's these times where this place is mentioned. And it's a place in the Old Testament where decisive, important battles take place. And so Revelation is importing that imagery of a battle, a big battle. But it's going to be against who here? Who's the one being judged? What was that? I don't think it's the whole world here. I think we're going to get to that in a couple chapters.
It says
The kings, yes. And remember in verse 19, Babylon is the one that's going to be split into 3 cities. I think this is talking about judgment against Babylon, that God's wrath is going to be poured out on this wicked, adulterous, persecuting nation. That throughout history, nations have come and gone, and God has the right to do that. So, any thoughts? And it's using this Old Testament imagery to say it's going to be a decisive, earth-shattering judgment on these people. That's what the imagery of Megiddo or Armageddon, I think, is communicating. Yeah. Yes. Well, like the Roman Empire, when they were persecuting Christians, it was like the whole known world was going against them. And then God put an end to it. Yeah. But yeah, like this worldly, like, oh, we got to be all unified and stuff. Well, unified to do what? If it's unified to kill Christians, I don't like that. And so sometimes things can sound really nice and peaceful and like world peace against Christians. And I would imagine that that's what some of the frogs would represent. These unclean ideas that are moving people against the true Lord. Any other thoughts or comments or questions about this so far? All right, I know that Revelation's not the easiest book, and so I think we're hanging in this. Chapters 17 and 18 next week are going to be a little simpler, but let's look at this. In verse 15, there's this parenthetical encouragement for Christians to hang on in the midst of it all. It's going to look really bad, but you guys are ultimately going to be okay, which again is like the message of the whole book. But look at the 7th bowl now. Look at verses 17 through 21. The 7th angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." And there were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a great earthquake, such as there had never been since man was on the earth. So great was that earthquake. The great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And God remembered Babylon the Great to make her drain the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath. And every island fled away, and no mountains were to be found. And great hailstones, about 100 pounds each, fell from heaven on people, and they cursed God for the plague of the hail, because the plague was so severe. All right. So when this bowl is like poured into the air, any idea what the significance of pouring it out into the air would mean? It's going to go everywhere. Like this is the last one. And so this is going to finish there's thunder and lightning and earthquake, things that we've seen before, like maybe smaller tremors in the book. But this is like a climactic one, at least as it goes against Rome. And the city is split into 3 parts. Any ideas why the city would be split into 3 parts? And maybe a hint on this would be verse 13. Yeah, you've got the beast and the dragon and the 2 beasts, and they're each supplying a frog. And now this unholy trinity has been broken up. It's like they can't team up anymore against God's people after this judgment has been done. And so what happens to the city then after it's divided up into 3 parts? So does it like divide into 3 cities that become their own metropolises, or what happened? Yeah. Yeah, they all fall. What did you say?
Like fade away. And I'm also like reminded of like when the Pharisees were accusing Jesus of, using demonic powers to cast out demons. And he's like, a kingdom that's divided against itself cannot stand.
Yes. Evil always ends up turning on itself. And so, do you guys remember in Daniel chapter 2 where there was this big prophecy about the 4 kingdoms that are going to come, and the 4th kingdom was Rome? Do you guys remember what in that statue the feet were made out of? Clay and what else? Iron. Does clay and iron like work well together? No, like it's a shaky foundation. And I think the way that the Roman Empire fell was from within. Like it ate itself. They didn't have to worry. The Visigoths eventually came, but a lot of the crumbling started from within. Could that happen to a local church? Could that happen to a family? Could that happen to a nation today, where we kill each other, and like the opposing nations are like, dude, just let them do it because they're taking care of themselves. That's sort of like what happened to the Roman Empire. Now, in the midst of all of this, we haven't seen this yet, but one of the shocking things that we see, look at verse 21. There's these huge 100-pound hailstones. Why do you think that's set? You think that literally happened to the Roman Empire? Do you think there was 100-pound hailstones that fell down? What's the point of saying this? Yes. Is this a way of depicting the destruction and the pain and the agony that's going to come upon them? And they would have had the gods of the sky and the gods of the sea and the god of the whatever. They had gods for everything. And it's like all of these areas that they honor these gods, like, the sea, sky, whatever, all of these things are crumbling, showing them that their gods are all false. And so if you got these big hailstones, what it would be depicting to the original audience is whatever gods you think protect you from the sky or the land or whatever, they're all going to let you down because they're not truly powerful. But these people curse God for the plague. Go back to verse 9. They were scorched by the fierce heat, and they cursed the name of God who had power over these plagues. They did not repent and give him glory. Look at verse 11. These people cursed the God of heaven for their pain and their sores. They did not repent of their deeds. 3 times in this chapter, these people are not repenting. What does that show you about the kind of grip that worldliness had on these people? Have you ever known anybody before who had one bad thing happen to them after another? And maybe you could trace it back to bad decisions they made, maybe you couldn't, but either way, what they cared about more than God was letting them down. And they blamed God for it. Have you ever seen people go through difficulties and they shake their fist at God? And God could just respond by saying, I had to send that to you because you didn't know that I was the one to be honored. And the very thing that's supposed to be teaching you that you can't put your trust in this world is causing you to get more angry at me, as if I owed you something. That's what's happening with these people. Any thoughts or comments on any of this? Yeah.
It just makes me think of Job and how the whole idea was curse God,
Yes.
but he never did.
Yeah, these people do curse God and they are dying. Yeah, that's a good connection. All right, so I understand this morning a little bit more complicated than other sections we've looked at. It will get less complicated next week.